This is the first video that I've made on Elizabethan England, the GCSE topic for the AQA spec, and I'm starting with the religious settlement. The religious settlement becomes a focal point and leads to many other important events that you study in this particular topic, namely the succession crisis, the Catholic threat, the arrival of Mary Queen of Scots, the Spanish Armada, and the arrival of Catholic missionaries known as the Jesuits, who carry out massacres on Protestants in Europe, notably France, the St. Bartholomew's Day. So let's remind ourselves, what was the religious settlement and why did Elizabeth feel the need to implement it?
Elizabeth came to the throne in 1558 following the death of her sister Queen Mary I. Henry VIII, Elizabeth's father, had established the Church of England in the 1530s following disagreements with the Pope, notably over the issue of Henry wanting a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, so he could marry Anne Boleyn. This introduced the Reformation to England, a movement that was to turn England from being a Catholic to a Protestant country. Following the death of Henry, the country had experienced a series of short-term monarchs that saw counter-Reformation movements too. That's resistance to England becoming Protestant. This had caused many religious conflicts in England. Mary I had even burned 300 Protestants at the stake during her reign. Elizabeth was a Protestant and wanted to end this era of religious upheaval. She wanted England to be a Protestant country, but with some compromise towards Catholics in order to avoid a civil war. In other words, she wanted to find a middle way. The measures she took in the first few years of her reign are known as her religious settlements.
So one of the aims of Elizabeth's religious settlements was to turn England into a Protestant country, but to keep the Catholics content so they didn't rebel. Let's remind ourselves of some of the differences between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church.
The Catholic Church believed the Bible should be in Latin. People just had to accept what they were being told was God's will, really without understanding what they were being told. Churches should be decorated with paintings, statues, and stained glass windows. Many could not understand Latin, so this was a way of getting the story of the crucifixion across to people. The Pope was the head of the church and has a final say on all religious matters. Now, with the Protestant Church, Protestants believed that the Bible should be in their own language so that people could more easily engage with their religion. Protestants believed that any decoration in church would distract people from worshipping God, so their churches tended to be plain. The monarch is the head of the church.
So what challenges in terms of religion did Elizabeth face when she became queen in 1558?
The dilemma of religion in England. In 1558, most of England's bishops were Catholic. Changing the religion of the country needed an Act of Parliament. The House of Commons would be likely to agree with what Elizabeth wanted, but there were a lot of Catholic bishops in the House of Lords. Parts of England were more Catholic than others, meaning that people living there were less likely to accept Protestantism. These areas tended to be further away from London. Parts of the North and West Diocese, areas looked after by a bishop, were especially Catholic. London, East Anglia, and the South East tended to be more Protestant. They had closer links with the Netherlands and German states where Protestantism became popular.
The 39 Articles were established in 1563, and these were statements that told people how to practice their religion under the Church of England. This was an important part of Elizabeth's religious settlement, but the religious settlement can also be defined by two very important pieces of legislation in 1559.
Now, the Act of Supremacy made Elizabeth governor of the Church of England. Clergy and royal officials had to swear an oath of allegiance to Elizabeth. An ecclesiastical high commission was set up to maintain the discipline within the church. Every parish had to have a copy of the Bible in English, and Anglican priests were allowed to get married. With the Act of Uniformity, all churches had to appear a certain way with a common book of prayer. The book of prayer was all in English, no longer in Latin. Some ornaments and decorations were still allowed, along with the singing of hymns. This was to try and compromise to everyone, but it failed to do so with the Puritans. Priests were still allowed to wear special clothing that wasn't just plain white. This was to compromise with the Catholics.
We're now going to have a look at an exam question. Now, the religious settlement can come up practically anywhere on the Elizabeth paper. It could come up as an importance question, But we're going to have a look at question 1. We're going to have a look at an interpretation.
So the question we're going to have a look at is question 1. Now, question 1 is always a convincing question. Now, I must remind you that when you are looking at a convincing question, you must discuss the content rather than the provenance. The provenance is the part at the bottom that tells you who made the source, and it will often tell you when it was made. In this instance, interpretation D is adapted from the Royal Museum's Greenwich website, which describes Elizabeth's aims when she became queen. I'm going to read out the content. The message was very clear that they were all, including Elizabeth, members of the same team, working together for a common goal, that of a united, prosperous England. Extremes were to be avoided in order to unite, not divide. In this statement, Elizabeth very deliberately disassociated herself from the unpopularity of Mary's regime by signalling how hers would be different. Now, we're looking to see how convincing this statement is, and we're going to unpack this statement. I'm then going to give you a chance to answer the question yourself using the mark scheme. Now, it's convincing because we know Elizabeth reduced the numbers of people in her Privy Council so that everyone would be in line with her religious settlement. She got rid of many Catholic members as she streamlined her Privy Council. There was extreme division previously under Mary. Now, we know that. We know that 300 Protestants were burnt at the stake as Mary launched a counter-Reformation movement. Elizabeth wanted to find a middle way. And in order to do so, we might believe that she would disassociate herself from Mary's regime. Now remember, any 8 marker is usually 2 big points, so 2 paragraphs. Feel free to pause the video and attempt your own answer. You can use this mark scheme to guide you and then self-assess.
This has been my first video on Elizabeth. Now, as you probably know, you can get lots of information on the Tudors, whether it be from Hollywood films, books, online articles, the BBC website, from the Teaching Education Supplement website that has loads and loads of resources. Now, the topic of Elizabeth and the Tudors is usually taught and learned in many different ways. That's probably because history has been written by many historians almost as if it's a soap opera. That's how they've come to grips with different events and also the characters that come in and out of Elizabeth's life.
To keep you here.
Because that's what you want. You took what you want without a thought for my reputation, for my future. I can't do this anymore, Elizabeth.